everyone, and welcome back to the second video. Again, this is still a guide into the Persian aspect of the GCSE Ancient History, and today we're going to be looking at Cambyses. So Cambyses II was son of Cyrus the Great, and he ruled the Achaemenid Empire from 530 BC until his death in 522. Following Cyrus the Great's conquest of the Near East and Central Asia, Cambyses further expanded the empire into Egypt, which you can see on the map down here. He did this by defeating the Egyptian pharaoh during the Battle of Pelusium in 525 BC. As a result of this, the things I've chosen to focus on largely revolve around his foreign and religious policy, especially looking at examples from Egypt. I'm also going to be throwing in some comparisons to Cyrus along the way. So the first piece of evidence we're going to be looking at is the account of Ujarasne. He was an Egyptian member of the elite and held the title of chief physician and treasurer under the Achaemenid kings Cambyses and Darius. We know about his remarkable and controversial career thanks to his autobiography inscribed on the statue known as the Naforo Vaticano, which is Italian for the Vatican Napharos. Although Ajaharasne worked under the reign of both Cambyses and Darius, I'm choosing to analyse this evidence within the context of Cambyses only, his foreign policy and his religious toleration. Many of the Greek sources included in the textbook note that Cambyses was a harsh ruler who took little regard of the religions and traditions of those he conquered. However, if you look at the teaching guide, it says that the independent Egyptian evidence shows that Cambyses may have respected Egyptian religion and played a role in ceremonies. I'm analysing Ajaharasne's account to hopefully give students and teachers evidence to apply to this point of view. So here is where he's highlighted in the teaching guide, all of this part here. So a quick introduction onto the statue. In the inscription carved on his long robe, he describes the Achaemenid kings as respectful towards Egyptian tradition, presenting an image of the Persian occupation contrary to what we find in Greek sources, which are strongly influenced by those anti-Persian propaganda. The exact provenance of this statue is unknown, but it's assumed to have been found in the city of Sais in the Nile Delta. So now into some analysis. I would say before I pick up the inscription, a great piece of scholarship to look at if you can get your hands on it would be the inscription of Ajaharasne, a collaborator's testament by Alan B. Lloyd, and you can get this through JSTOR if you have access. I read quite a lot of this work and it's given me a great in-depth look at the language used on this inscription and what that means about Cambyses in Egypt. There are a couple of sections to this inscription, but I'm going to focus on his autobiography. This section is mainly taken up with an account of Ajaharasne's relations with Cambyses. So here's the inscription. The great king of all foreign lands, Cambyses, came to Egypt. The foreigners of all foreign lands being with him in its entirety did he gain his mastery of the land. Setting themselves down therein, he was the great ruler of Egypt and the great chief of all foreign lands. His Majesty handing over to me the office of chief physician, having caused me to be beside him as a companion and controller of the palace, when I had made his royal titular in his name of King of Upper and Lower Egypt. I made supplication in the presence of the Majesty of the King of Upper and Lower Egypt, Cambyses, concerning all the foreigners who had settled in the temple of Neith, to drive them thereon in, as to cause the temple of Neith to be in all its beneficial powers, as in its primal condition, so that his Majesty commanded that all foreigners who had settled in the temple of Neith be expelled, that all their houses be demolished, and all their abominations which were in this temple. And his Majesty commanded that the temple of Neith be purified, and that all its people be restored to it. The priesthood of the temple his Majesty commanded that offerings should be given to Neith the Great One, the mother of the god, and to the great gods who are in Sais as it was earlier. His Majesty commanded that all their festivals should be organised and their feasts of manifestation as was done earlier. This did his Majesty do because it caused his Majesty to recognise the greatness of Sais. It is the city of all gods who shall remain on their throne therein forever. The king of Upper and Lower Egypt, Cambyses, came to Sais. His Majesty betook himself to the temple of Neith and touched the ground before her very great Majesty, even as every king had done. He made a great offering of all good things to Neith the Great One, the mother of the god and the great gods who are in Sais, even as every excellent king had done. This his Majesty did because it had caused him to know the greatness of her Majesty, for she is the mother of Re himself. His Majesty completed all that is beneficial in the temple of Neith, establishing the libation for the Lord of his eternity in the temple of Neith, even as every king did earlier. This did his Majesty do because I had caused him to recognise how everything beneficial had been fulfilled in this temple by every king, because of the greatness of this temple. It is the place of all the gods who live eternity. So this is a very long inscription, but there is a lot of good stuff to be looked at in here. So I'm just going to pick out a few bits. So it can be observed that Adja dwells with particular insistence on the way in which Cambyses has accepted the traditional model of Egyptian kingship and regulated his behaviour by it. So Sais was a royal city, and Cambyses is represented by Adja as showing that city in its cult's particular respect. So he uses titles to point out his assumption of pharaonic status. So he's described as a great chief and associated with foreign lands and foreigners, usages which emphasize his initially non-Egyptian status. But on his conquest of Egypt, he becomes known as the great ruler of Egypt, and he's quoted as the king of Upper and Lower Egypt. This distinction can only mean that his position in Egypt is a special one. So some readers may be inclined to question the historical accuracy of all this in view of the tradition of Cambyses impiety towards Egyptian cults, which is preserved in the classical sources. However, I believe this just reflects little more than hostile propaganda. By reading these passages, we can see that Cambyses actually made a genuine attempt to reconcile the Egyptians to Persian rule by adopting their traditional role of pharaoh and all its religious implications. So many similarities have been drawn up between the toleration of Cyrus and that of Cambyses. So I found an activity in the textbook which I would strongly recommend to everyone having a go at. By filling in this table with the evidence I have provided you from this video and my previous Cyrus one, you can start to think about the continuity and change between both kings, and this will be especially useful at hitting those AO2 and the really hard AO3 marks. You can use details in your own knowledge to decide how different Cambyses' policies towards foreign peoples was from that of Cyrus. But I would personally say that Cambyses focused less on the liberation of people and more the adoption of the religions and cults that he came across first. So the second and unfortunately last piece of material evidence I have for Cambyses is the epitaph of the Apis bull. So this epitaph is showcasing very similar themes to the account of Adja, so I won't spend too long on it, but it's something that teachers should really show your students, and students, you could put this in that table I just suggested and have a go at it. So underneath the teaching guide, it lists the Apis epitaph under the themes of personality and priorities of Cambyses and the treatment of family, friends and other cultures. So in this specific case, it would be the other cultures. So the Apis bull is a sacred bull of Egyptian religion, thought to be an appearance of the god Ptah. When Cambyses returned to Memphis, a new bull had been identified. So Herodotus tells a tale of madness on the king's part when discovering the new bull, one that I will insist that you sort of read up on yourself. But first we'll look at a more positive representation in this epitaph. So archaeologists have discovered the remains of a temple in Memphis where the embalmed bodies of dead Apis bulls have been placed into tombs, and you can see that the inside of that on the right there. They have been able to date an Apis bull which was dedicated in November 524 BC, exactly when Cambyses was presented as Egyptian king. So this is the epitaph that accompanies that bull, and having a quick look, it shows a kingly figure here representing Cambyses, and if you have a look, he's there venerating the Apis bull, which is on this side of the epitaph here. So there's an inscription that accompanies with this epitaph, which I will read out now. So year 6, 3rd month of the season of Shamu, day 1, under the majesty of the king of Upper and Lower Egypt, Mesuti-Re, given life forever. The god was taken up in peace towards the perfect west, and was laid to rest in his place in the necropolis, in the place where his majesty has made for him after all the ceremonies had been performed for him, in the hall of embalming. All was done that his majesty had ordered in the year 27 of Cambyses. So this is at the Serapeum in Memphis, and you can see the plan of the Serapeum here, and you've got all the tombs on one side and the entrance at the other. And there's also an engraving here of the first excavations which took place in the 1850s, which is also quite interesting. So the inscription nearby to the Apis bull confirmed that Cambyses was the one who ensured that the Apis had been embalmed and buried with full ceremonies, and Cambyses himself was presented as a traditional Egyptian pharaoh, and by this version of events, Cambyses was fully respectful of the local religious traditions. If you combine this with Udjaresne's account, we're left with a picture of positive religious toleration, which seems to completely outweigh what we've read in the classical sources before. But I'm going to end this video with you sort of thinking, like, coming up with your own opinions, and then you can use those in your essays. So finally, here we have my bibliography, and just at the top there we have Lloyd's work, The Inscription of Udjaresne, a Collaborator's Testament. I would really recommend you look deeply into this work. He's very good at picking up the subtle nuances of language that Udjaresne uses, so that really gives you a sense of how the Egyptians themselves viewed Cambyses as a ruler. And I also want to point out third down, Bryant from Cyrus to Alexander. This is a really great overview work which has actually been recommended in the teaching guide also. And if you want to have a look at other sources, also get an idea for the general period, then I recommend this would probably be the one that you look at.